We have decided to do this all through Vector. And our main reason is because one, it is hard coordinating times for students to come in for an actual training. And we are moving towards creating more training videos that would be a little bit more helpful, um, and make it a little bit more accessible so that students who are starting either during the fall semester and aren't necessarily here earlier to get that training in and make it easier on us during the spring semester as well, because some folks are gone during Jan term. So doing training isn't necessarily the easiest thing to do and coordinating everyone. And then if somebody misses something, they're not getting all the information they need. So we're consolidating it all here so that it's consistent. Everyone receives the same information. And it'll be updated during the summer with a little bit more formal of a video. But a little bit about the lab staff. If you haven't met me or Noah, so my name is Livy. I am a Whitworth alumna from the class of 2022, which is crazy to think that was 4 years ago. I'm currently enrolled in the MBA program, and I'm pursuing the Master's of Business to hopefully do hospital administration or just something outside, like lab management or something different. Something that allows me to work a little bit more remote is really the goal. Um, yeah, and I love to bake sourdough bread. That's my favorite thing. I often bring things to bake, and I love to read a good book. So don't be afraid to stop by my office and say hi, and I'm always happy to chat and just see how you're doing. But just a brief overview of general student employee expectations. So we're going to just go over some business items, our teams, which will be in a separate video. So I will probably gloss over this in this overarching video, and then working in the lab. So before we actually get to the time cards, so you should have received an email if you are a TA for pay for your work authorization. So this is just an email from student employment or even the K2 system that tells you that you need to fill out this form. And basically, it's reading through this form of the expectations of student employment that you have filled out your I-9, your W-4, and your direct deposit, and that the position that you are accepting, you are eligible for, and that you've turned in all of the information, and then student employment can process it, and that will generate your time card. So the sooner you fill that out and sign it, the faster student employment can process it, and then the sooner you'll have your time card. So be sure to do that. If you are a brand new student employee, then you'll have to make sure all your paperwork is in. If this is your third or fourth or even second on-campus job, you don't need to be worrying about turning in your I-9 or W-4 over and over again, because that information is already on file. As for training, so you'll be doing this, a quiz. If you're a brand new student employee or have never completed FERPA training, that'll be automatically assigned to you, kept on file, and you have to renew it every 2 years. So most of you should have done this last semester or even before. If not, you'll do it again. It'll be on record and it'll be done. TA training, even if you are a returning TA, happens every single semester. Yes, that is a lot, but training that is repetitive helps, hopefully, you remember more things. That is the goal. So all your safety training will be done through Vector and the FERPA training as well as this. And now a lot of you are also familiar with Title IX, so I am a mandatory reporter as well as Noah. And since you are now employees of the university, you are also mandatory reporters. So if a student comes up to you saying like, hey, I need to talk to somebody about this event that happened to me that may have qualified along the lines of harassment of any kind, um, you have to tell them, and you have to make sure all your students know that you are a mandatory reporter. So you have to tell even if you don't feel comfortable reporting it to the Title IX office, you have to tell Noah or I so that we can report it to the Title IX office. That is just what Title IX covers. And so that's why if you have a student that does have a situation and they need to talk to somebody about it, there are two places on campus that they can go to, and that is the chaplains in the chapel, because they are not mandatory reporters, as well as the health center. So be sure to remember that and be aware of the resources that we have available to help your fellow students and peers. Yeah, let's get into the time cards. So sometimes the time cards are a little finicky, but once they're populated and everything is processed with your student employment, you should log into self-service and you have an employee option. So we have this employee option that is available to you. And if you click on it, you will have multiple options such as tax information, leave, but we just want to focus on time entry. And so when you fill out or when you click on time entry, you will get these auto-populated options by week. And this is done by the time card period. So for students, you work the 1st through the 16th. That's when you turn in your time cards. And that will be paid out 2 weeks later, so around the 27th. And then from the 6th, or sorry, so it's the 1st through the 15th, and then the 16th through the end of the month. And that is usually paid on the 12th or 13th of the month, depending on how your banking situation works. So when you go log into the whatever week that you choose, most of you should be fairly familiar with it now, but you will probably, if you're working on Tuesday, only put hours in for Tuesday. If you are doing the training on Monday, you would put the hours in for Monday. So you have to specifically put the AM and PM, otherwise it does get really upset. And if you have multiple time cards, separating out that information would be super helpful so that I know if you do have multiple jobs, like how much is TAing versus grading. So if you are a grader who's also a TA, you will have 2 time cards, and separating out that time would be super fantastic. You should fill out your time card at the end of the week or after the end of your lab section. After you are done working, this should be filled out, saved, not necessarily submitted, but if you're not working anymore that week, please submit it so that you don't forget about it later in the week. The submission time deadlines for your time card would be the 16th in the middle of the month, as well as the 1st of the new month. So by noon for each time. So please make sure to submit them as soon as possible so that we can double check them and approve them. And if there is any issue, we are able to catch it on our end and make sure that we can input time if you forgot one week. If you happen to forget any time entered and you think about it, hopefully, as soon as that deadline happens and you missed it, please refer to the payroll office, which is located in the Alt House, which is with HR. You will have to fill out a paper time card, but you need to do it as soon as possible because legally they want to pay out those hours. But it gets really difficult if you're coming to them 2 weeks after that deadline, because then they have to backtrack, and that doesn't make any sense because so if you miss a deadline, please, pretty please, either let us know, your supervisor, so that we can try and input that time, and if not, then you will have to fill out a paper time card. And then we have Microsoft Teams. I'm just going to breeze through this a little bit because this is the desktop version, and I did a separate video on the mobile version. But if you go to Microsoft Teams, we expect that you can have this downloaded on your phone to the very least, mostly because that is our main method of communication. And so for me, it's a lot faster. I receive notifications on my phone because I also get phone calls from vendors. So this is the fastest way to communicate with me if you have questions or need something. And this is how I will choose to communicate with you in your assigned lab group chats. So this is for me to tell you, hey, this is what's happening this week, or here's what to look out for if something weird is happening in lab. So this is how I communicate with you, the instructors will communicate with you. So this is just a good thing to have all around. So before you come to work, I do expect that you access the teaching assistants folder. So if you go through Teams and teaching assistants, now it's changed. If you have the newest version of Teams, it's Files is no longer called Files, it's now called Shared. Um, oops. And you'll select one of your folders to go into. And you should just select your TA notes, your procedures, read through them, and your safety sheets, become familiar with them. This will definitely help answer any questions, or the instructor may have you do a demonstration. So it is helpful to know what is going on in the lab before you show up to lab. When you're working in the lab, it is really important to me that you are assisting your lab instructor, that you are leading with intentionality. So making sure that you are wearing proper PPE at all times, that you are wearing socks that cover your ankles or pants that cover your ankles, and that you are, in a sense, being a role model for the peers around you. So just making sure that you are answering questions, keeping everyone accountable, and doing your best not to just basically take over the lab, but to be the best assistant that you can be, and making sure that waste is being monitored. If spills happen, like knowing where the spill kits are and bicarb. So all those different things, super important to know. And some important things to know is just you will be expected to come up to the stockroom window in case a student doesn't feel confident doing so, or retrieving waste, or getting a new waste bottle, or helping a student if they injure themselves. So just different things to keep in mind. Um, so again, if you come to work, this is just the expectation, just in a shortened timeline. Read the TA notes and the procedures and safety sheets. The day of, you want to stop by the stockroom window, say hi, sign your name. Sign your name. Sign your time next to your name for the date. Now you're going to go to lab, and then once you're done with lab and you clean up and do everything that's on your TA notes, you'll come back up to the stockroom window and check out for the day, and let us know if there's anything that you need for the next section, or if everything went well, or things are just taking longer than normal. So I did not update the week of check-in, but that's not September 9th through 11th, but it is next week, February. So you'll stop by the stockroom window and you'll pick up your check-in sheets when you sign in. You'll hand the colored papers. So if you are Gen Chem, it'll be orange or yellow. If it's OChem, it's probably some variation of green. And if you're 101, 102, you will not have any check-in sheets. So those will go to the instructor. The instructor will place them out, set them out, and you'll fill in the white sheet with whoever is sitting at that station. And if you have missing equipment, you'll send the students to the stockroom. If you have broken equipment, if it's glass, please put it in the glass disposal box, and we'll come and get them a replacement, of course. And if a lock doesn't work really well, let's get them switched out early on in the semester, because it does become really challenging because those locks are quite old and we don't want to create unnecessary problems early on in the semester. And then once a student is ready to leave, we really want to make sure that they clean their station well. The biggest problem that we see is that students often leave a lot of clamps out. And then at the end of the semester, they are have this huge drawer full of clamps or little glassware. So if you could just really double check that clamps are taken down appropriately before that student leaves lab, and before you give them your signature on their DAS or on their lab notebook, that the clamps are not in their hood. Especially, this is more for OChem, because you are in your individual hoods and it's kind of hard to see perfectly. But just double check in there. before you send the student off. And then another problem we see is that students leave their drawers unlocked. This becomes an issue because then locks accidentally get picked up, and then students end up with the wrong lock on their drawer, and then they're like, I don't know how that happened. We don't either. So let's just make sure that drawers are locked and everything is cleaned up before that student is allowed to leave. Typically, in the past, I've done a tour of the lab, but instead of that, this is something I will probably task you on your first day just to keep in mind and note the locations, because everything is labeled in our labs. So please take some time the first day of lab to figure out where sodium bicarb is located. And I'll give you a hint, it's typically under a sink. Sand, paper towels, lab soap and simple green, hot plates, extra reagents, waste. If you're an organic, the waste is located under the Rotovap hood. Both are labeled. There are plenty of extra waste bottles and containers down there. And absorbent socks, usually located near the showers. So when you go into lab check-in week and you're there 15 minutes prior, please make sure just open all the cabinets, look through everything, and see where things are. I've done tours of the lab in the past, and to be frank with you guys, most of the time students don't even remember where half the things are. So I'm going to task you with taking the time to search for these things. And lastly, I just want to do a little bit more of a safety discussion, because I think oftentimes we get a little bit too comfortable being in a university sanctioned lab or even a teaching lab where we don't think we are working with such hazardous things. Now, I'm going to be also really honest, is that we aren't necessarily working with the most hazardous things possible, but that doesn't necessarily mean we can carry this ignorance with us when we are working with different things, no matter how often we work with them, because there are so many different students that we see that come into all these labs, and they all have different backgrounds, different levels of confidences. So anything can happen because we are all not the same person. But the number one way we promote a healthy safety culture is ultimately being aware of the policies and protections we have in place as a university, so that when we come across a situation, we have something to fall back on that is consistent across the board for everyone. And the major way all universities do this, and even industry companies, so if you ever choose to work in industry and they don't have this, that is problematic. So the number one thing is a chemical hygiene plan. So ours is labeled differently. It is similar to a chemical hygiene plan, but it's an occupational safety, chemical hazardous safety plan. And what this entails is basically all the policies and procedures, so standard operating procedures that we have in place to protect our students, faculty, and staff when working with certain levels of materials. And so information on this would include how we deal with waste, how we stay safe in the lab, how we deal with radioactive material or even peroxide formers. So all of those are it is available on our occupational and health and safety page on the Whitworth website. So if you are curious to look at it to see what we have, it is available to you, and it's important that you are aware of what that is, even if you don't read it. The other things we want to make sure you know is what an SDS is. So our safety data sheets, we all have physical copies of every chemical alphabetically organized in the computer lab in those large binders. So obviously, you might not want to run up the stairs in the midst of an emergency. So that's why we have our SDSs available through LabCup, and we have every professor has a LabCup account, or you could simply look up the SDS on the internet, which is why we put the CAS numbers on our chemical labels so that it's easier to find the exact chemical without having to search through so much information. And then the other part of safety is our Global Harmonized System. It's our GHS symbols. So the exclamation point or the skull and crossbones, for example, those are good things to review so that you are just aware of the essential information. So it's not every detailed hazard or level of hazard. It just shows you the general hazard. Um, and then we want to think about hazards that are present during the lab outside of chemicals. So we can have electrical hazards, physical hazards such as the drawers or lots of equipment. We can have our just gas hazards from having the natural gas from the Bunsen burners. So lots of things to look out for.